What's up guys, it's Trevor with Embers. Today we're talking wood stoves. Specifically, we're talking about two different types of stoves. We're talking about, should you buy a cast iron stove, like our Vermont Castings lineup that we have here, and our Hearthstones around the corner, or should you buy like a steel wood insert or a steel stove? And what the heck is the difference between them? Well, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna tell you the pros of the cast iron, the cons of the cast iron, and the pros and cons of a steel stove like this. Let's get started. As always guys, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a ton when you guys do that. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you're in the Denver, Colorado area, come to our showroom today. All right, let's talk the differences. Cast iron versus steel. Those are really the two types of stoves. There's a couple outliers on there, like some soapstone stoves, which we have, which we break down the differences in some of our other videos. You can watch our top 5 videos. Well, there's also a major factor of whether you should do catalytic or non-catalytic. Again, I have a video on that, you can watch that. But for the most part, the two most common types of stoves, materials, is cast iron and steel. So let's talk pros and cons of both. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, either way. It's really gonna be based off your individual needs, and I'll explain that a little bit as we go through the video. I'm just gonna give you and educate you guys on the pros and cons between the two, and hopefully you guys can make an informed decision at home what's gonna be the right type of stove for you. Also, before I dive way too deep into this, both types of stoves, especially if you're buying an EPA certified stove, something made in North America, either in Canada or the United States, you're getting an awesome stove. You're gonna have a great stove either way. So in this video, we are splitting hairs a bit, in my opinion, but that's up for you to decide. All right, let's talk about the pros of cast iron. Just looking at these, Chris, what do you think one of the initial pros is of cast iron stove versus the other ones you see in the showroom?
The colors.
Colors. So what's cool about cast iron is it has a lot of flexibility in what you can do from a design standpoint. We can do like just simple sort of matte black, just like a standard cast iron finish. And then other stoves like this you see have cast iron with like a porcelain coating on them. So it gives us a lot of color options as well. Also with cast iron, they're very detail oriented usually. You can see a lot of these stoves have like nice webbing, ornate finishes on the side. So there's a lot you can do with these stoves to sort of dress them up and make them pretty detail oriented, which is super cool. So you have a lot of flexibility aesthetically with cast iron. The flip side of that though is, in general, and this isn't a hard rule of thumb, in general, cast iron stoves generally look more traditional. If you want super ultra modern, that's usually more like a steel stove, which we'll talk about in a bit. So that's sort of the pros of the aesthetics of cast iron. Another pro, when we were talking performance, is cast iron retains heat more than steel. So the actual cast iron box itself is going to actually build heat better, I guess you would say. It's gonna get actually hotter. There is a con to that, which we'll talk about in a minute, but essentially this stove is gonna retain heat, and the physical stove itself should run a little bit hotter. All right, let's talk some of the cons or the downsides of cast iron a little bit. Typically one of the downsides is, and it's just I'm sure the cost of raw materials themselves. Cast iron can tend to be a little bit more expensive. So you're usually gonna spend a little bit more money on a cast iron stove. Again, that's not a hard and fast rule. It's not like every single cast iron stove out there is more expensive than a steel stove, but from a generality standpoint, that's usually the case. Another con we want to talk about is these stove bodies themselves the stoves are physically just like solid cast iron. They do have fire brick on the inside, but the walls, tops and bottoms, the sides are made of cast iron. And now they're usually cast iron plating. So what do I mean by that? The side's a plate, the top's a plate, the front's a plate, and they're sort of gasketed and mortared together. So because they're solid cast iron, now when I say solid, I mean they're solid panels. So it's not just one sort of bowl of cast iron, if that makes sense. They're actually paneled together. So this can cause a problem down the road, I would say, if you maintain your stove properly. This could be a long time down the road, it could be 15, 20 years, but they start to lose over time some of their airtightness. Now you could have maybe a little smoke coming off the sides or something like that, but they tend to, after time, not become 100% airtight. It's fixable. You can usually regasket it, remortar it, and you're back in business. And again, these are minor complaints. These are not complaints that we're seeing anytime soon after a customer buys one of these, but they're not solid one-piece fireboxes, if that makes sense. So that's sort of a couple of the cons of cast iron. Here's a con that is more circumstantial. Remember how we talked about cast iron sort of retains and keeps heat in? This could actually become a negative thing, like if you're trying to heat, let's say, a huge open space. So the showroom, for example, you know, we have 20-foot ceilings, it's 4,000, 5,000 square feet of just wide open showroom. If you're trying to heat like a big barn or a big open space, sometimes that can negatively affect you because the stove is retaining so much heat. The stove doesn't spread, the heat doesn't really spread through a big open area quite as fast as a steel stove, even though it is running hotter. So it's sort of a wash on that benefit. If it's in a smaller room or a broken up part of the house, definitely a plus. But if you're trying to heat a big open space, in that circumstance, I may steer you more towards a steel stove. So it's sort of the pros and cons, just a simple education on the difference between the two. I'm sure I'm missing some things. Again, we're not breaking down efficiencies because we're talking generalities of everything being EPA certified. So everything's clean burning. Everything's going to give you overnight burns, whether it's cast iron or steel. You should have 7 to 9 hour burn times depending on the size of your firebox. Should we talk steel a little bit?
Let's talk steel.
Let's talk steel. Okay, let's talk pros here. Aesthetically, now again, you can see how this is a personal preference. This could be a pro or it could be a con. But you can see aesthetically, much cleaner, simpler line. So in general, steel stoves are just kind of more simple. They're not super ornate. They definitely lend themselves to, or can lend themselves more modern. You know, this step top model looks pretty traditional, but you can see this one looks pretty modern, and then you can get really crazy with like some Morso stuff, like Supreme makes some really modern contemporary stuff. Osborne makes some other stuff where you're talking really, really modern, really cool looking stoves, but those usually lend themselves more to steel stoves. So aesthetically, they're a little more simple. Cons wise, on an aesthetic standpoint, is you don't usually get a ton of choices. You get black or charcoal. So you're pretty much getting a steel painted black stove, more or less. Okay, let's talk some of the other pros. Well, like I said earlier, some of the pros are, it's usually gonna cost you less. In general, especially with some of the bigger stoves, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck on a bigger stove with a steel stove. So they're generally a little more cost effective. Let's talk another pro about how a steel stove is designed. Remember we talked about one of the cons with cast iron was that it wasn't a completely sealed firebox. There's sort of plates that were mortared together. Well, the opposite is true of steel. So these are hand welded, usually hand welded steel stoves. So they're completely seamless. So that's really cool because you don't have to worry about them losing their airtightness over time or rusting out or anything like that because of how bulletproof these things are built. So that's a major plus with steel stoves, is how they are welded and seamless, which is really cool. All right, now one of the cons, and again, this goes back to circumstantial if it actually is a con or not. But we mentioned they don't get as hot. They don't retain heat the same way cast iron does. So in general, the heat is gonna not get as hot, but one of the potential benefits is the heat's gonna disperse into the area quicker. So it would be a pro or a positive thing. Again, if you had big open space that you needed to heat, I'd almost do like a big steel stove. So we're building a new 4,000 square foot warehouse here, and gonna have 16-foot ceilings, 4,000 square feet, just 4 walls, simple. We're gonna heat that place with the biggest steel stove we can get because we just want that heat to go everywhere, if that makes sense. A cast iron stove would do just as fine in a big warehouse too. So I think it's minor details that we're talking about here. Another con to cast iron, or the steel, is even though it is a solid firebox, because it's steel versus cast iron, steel isn't quite as durable to heat. Now, what do I mean by that? Is it is possible to overfire a wood stove, and you could potentially warp the steel. That being said, I don't know. I might have seen one or two in the 12 years I've been selling them. You would have to be very, very negligent and how you are running a wood stove. You'd have to be missing fire brick out of there. You'd have to be just have that thing just ripping without paying any attention to it, loading it as full as it will go, having everything wide open, missing fire brick, so it's direct flame right on that steel. That could potentially cause a problem. So you have potential for warping. But again, that is minor, and you would have to be so negligent for that to happen. But it could happen, versus on a cast iron stove, I think you'd be hard pressed to warp cast iron. If you figure out how to warp cast iron, that's pretty cool. You got some kind of cool invention. So that's sort of the cons. So let's break it down again. Let's just kind of summarize the difference between the two. Cast iron, the pros are they can be a little more ornate, a little more colorful, but tend to lend themselves to more of a traditional look. Another advantage to cast iron is it retains more heat. So it's going to build up more heat in the space it's in and generally run a little bit hotter. The cons to cast iron is they aren't a fully seamless firebox. So down the road, they could have potential problems with becoming airtight or staying airtight. And the other con is they generally are more expensive. Steel, what are the pros to steel? Again, this is circumstantial, but they generally lend themselves to more of a clean look, more of a modern look. Another pro is they're in general a little more cost effective, and also another big pro is that they're a fully welded firebox, so they're completely seamless, which is nice. Con to them is they don't get as hot as cast iron, but again, that could be a pro if you have a big open space you need to heat, because the heat's going to disperse. Another negative is they have potential for warping. Again, very, very rare, very, very minor. Be hard pressed to do it. So hopefully that educates you a little bit at home. If you're trying to decide, should I get a cast iron stove? Should I get a steel stove? Don't forget, if you have any other questions, like should I get a catalytic stove or non-catalytic stove? We have a video on that as well. Check that out. And again, we didn't break down efficiencies too much because everything we sell is EPA certified. So go check out those other videos and maybe you can learn a little more. You can watch our top 5 wood stove video, which is going to educate you on everything you need on our top 5 favorite wood stoves, which has a nice combination of steel and cast iron in there. Don't forget, if you're in the Denver, Colorado area, come to our showroom today. Stay tuned for more videos. Thanks so much for watching.